Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. In the past on this channel we have looked at many classic arcade style beat 'em ups, and when it comes to this amazing belt scrolling genre, one of the absolute kings of producing games of this kind was of course Konami. In regards to this, the bright and colourful affair that we shall be covering in today's video is the Bucky O'Hare arcade game. An arcade brawler with shooting elements that, in my opinion, is every bit as good as some of the Konami heavyweights from the era that never stop receiving coverage and praise. In this upload that celebrates this undersung gem, we are not only going to take a deep dive look at this video game, but discuss the Bucky O'Hare franchise overall and its contributions to gaming and entertainment. So without further ado, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Bucky O'Hare the arcade game, a title that shouldn't be ignored. Yeah! Konami in the late 80s and early 90s was producing some of the greatest games around for both arcades and in the living room alike. As far as arcade games go, they would deliver some brilliant beat 'em ups involving some of the hottest licenses around. This would see them publish now legendary titles such as X-Men Arcade, the Simpsons 4-player beat 'em up and the iconic Turtles arcade games that I never seem to shut up about on here. One particular game that I personally think belongs on the same pantheon alongside these others is the Bucky O'Hare arcade game. This one is just as fun, vibrant and memorable as all of those fantastic titles. But before we get ourselves knee deep in discussing this extraterrestrial epic arcade encounter, let's take a trip down memory lane and look at what exactly Bucky O'Hare even was. The genesis of Bucky O'Hare occurred way back in 1977 when he was created by writer Larry Hama and artist Michael Golden. 77 was the very same year the first Star Wars movie hit cinemas, which would set the trend for much more space-themed entertainment to come. In this renaissance of space-age entertainment, the majority of video games such as Space Invaders, released in 1978, would carry an aliens from out of space theme as well. As for Bucky O'Hare, rather than being in a movie or a video game at birth, Bucky, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, would debut in his own comic book series in 1984. The story of these publications would feature this furry green maniac in a tale that follows him in a parallel universe where a war is going on between the inept United Animals Federation and the sinister Toad Empire. The United Animals Federation is an interplanetary republic run by sapient mammals, while the Toad Empire is controlled by a vast computer system known as Complex, which has led the highly consumeristic toad population to fight an expansionist campaign against the rest of the galaxy. To put it simply, the story is essentially Star Wars, but with space alien furries. Personally, I'd have just called it Fur Wars. After the success of converting the Ninja Turtles into a highly popular animated series, action figure range and media empire, the search appeared to be on to find another comic book to use as source material that could also bring the bacon home, with the cult classic Bucky O'Hare comic book series receiving that very honour in 1991. That year would see the whole franchise receive a heavy marketing push, with the brand firing on all cylinders in multiple different fronts simultaneously. The comic book would be adapted for a TV show known as Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars, which would feature one of the most memorable theme tunes of the era, Captain Bucky O'Hare, mutants and aliens and toads beware! Further to this, the entire comic book series would be republished and expanded upon with new panels, scenes and artwork. To truly maximise profits, all of this was even launched with its own action figure range, and not one but two different video games from Konami. The first of these would arrive on the Nintendo Entertainment System in January of 1992. While I would certainly likely enjoy spotlighting this game in the future on the channel, I feel it has received a lot more attention online than what would come in arcades later. After all, at one point in time, this excellent Mega Man clone used to get covered quite a lot, as during the early days of YouTube, it felt like when gamers were discussing games of the past, they would spotlight the Nintendo Entertainment System library more heavily than any other console in existence. Since those days now seem to be long behind us, and hardware like the GameCube and Wii appear to be getting more attention from popular YouTube channels, topics like Bucky O'Hare for the NES certainly deserve some modern exploration. But as for today, we are obviously turning our attention to the arcades. The arcade game would arrive 8 months later than its console counterpart in September of 1992, meaning this Konami game is slightly newer than the X-Men, Simpsons and the original Turtles arcade game. The same flavour of this era from Konami is very much represented in this entry too, offering up a bright, bold, whimsical affair that is yet another high quality example of exactly what this arcade giant was capable of over the period. Just like the Turtles arcade game, the Bucky O'Hare arcade game would be based off of the animated TV series that was based off of the comic book series from before that. However, despite many similarities in their inceptions, Bucky O'Hare would function quite differently from the other Konami licensed beat-em-ups that we have already mentioned multiple times throughout this video. What I mean by this is while the game is generally classified as a side-scrolling beat-em-up, the 4 player characters are each armed with laser guns, allowing for scrolling shooter elements to take place too. While this may not sound particularly brawly, Bucky O'Hare is not alone in the genre with mechanics of this kind existing, with other games seeing release containing similar features, such as Capcom's arcade game The Punisher, and the Capcom Alien vs Predator arcade game too. In fact, for a more recent example of gameplay of this kind existing, check out my upload looking at Mother Russia Bleeds, a modern fantastic beat-em-up that contains many shooting elements. Like with Konami's other beat-em-up arcade greats, the developers who worked on the game once again managed to do a wonderful job in capturing the look, feel and even the sound of the TV show. This includes cutscenes that even include voice work from the same voice actors who were a part of the television animation. The arcade game's track screen, that is accompanied by enthusiastic narration, describes the premise of the game's story that mirrors other Bucky O'Hare media, describing the war between the United Animal Federation and the Toad Empire. Once a coin is inserted, the player can choose between 1 or 4 playable protagonists who fans of a TV show and comic book will be more than familiar with. These characters, who can all work together in 4-player cooperative action, of course include Bucky O'Hare himself, the well-known green heroic captain of the spaceship known rather fittingly as Righteous Indignation. Further to this we have Blinky, the one-eyed android, Dead-Eye Duck, the 4-armed mallard, and who can forget Jenny, the telepathic Aldebaran cat. Right, admit it, how many of you freaky furry perverts out there have fantasized about making love to this character? I know you are watching this, Big Daddy Top Hat knows all. Ooh. Before the first stage commences, a cutscene with voice acting sees our crew of heroes head into Bucky's spacecraft, which is flying towards his homeworld that is aptly known as Planet Warren. As soon as the ship lands, action in the game starts instantly as players begin to start liberating the world of invading toads. Once here, you will begin to note that the bulk of the action in the game involves shooting your opponents with your laser-based weapons. However, in many instances, like in a more traditional beat-em-up, other maneuvers are useful to execute, such as jumping, flying kicks for example, that prove useful when jumping over enemy attacks and projectiles. Sometimes when enemies are downed, it is also possible to pick up items that they drop. These include hearts that can be used to replenish lost health, gold bars to pick up more points, or gun icons which function as power-ups, giving gamers much appreciated extra firepower. Underneath players' life bars there are also ball-like symbols that represent the amount of on-screen nukes that can be performed. These often prove handy when there are a lot of opponents on screen, or wanting to dispose of a staged boss. Speaking of bosses, the first stage boss fight occurs against Al Negator, a purple sleazosaur who sometimes worked for the Toad Empire as a spy and mercenary. Being the opening stage boss, he does not put up too much of a challenge, but certainly requires a hell of a lot more hits than any opponent who has appeared in the game thus far. After his defeat, a cutscene reveals in his interrogation by Bucky and his crew that all of the enslaved hairs from the planet Warren have been taken to Planet Punk, offering up the perfect reasoning to progress onto the next stage. Planet Punk begins with some downward scrolling for a change of pace, whereas while Bucky and co jump over streams of fire from flamethrowers and must take out enemies, they must also destroy prison holds, rescuing the enslaved hairs from within. As usual with these Konami Arcade classics, this helps create the illusion of a living, breathing world with satisfying outcomes to your heroics. The stage soon transitions into a more traditional side-scrolling, industrial-looking setting, whereby the Toad army and more mechanical opponents must be continued to be taken out. Moving on from here, there is a classic beat-em-up lift section, where players must shoot and destroy enemies as the elevator slowly rises, because as highlighted on here dozens of times before, it is illegal to make a beat-em-up without a lift section. At the top, the next boss fight commences, this time with a battle taking place against Toadborg. Toadborg is a high-ranking official in the Toad Empire, second only to Complex. According to the animated show and comic, at some point prior to the Toad Wars, Toadborg was so critically injured in battle that over half of his body had to be replaced by cybernetic components, leading to his intimidating look seen here. Upon his defeat, he is picked up and flown away by a double bubble. Rescued civilian hair celebrate the victory, but in the same cutscene, the Climate Converter lands to recapture Planet Punk. The Climate Converter stage features another paradigm shift in play, which this time sees how 4 heroes hovering with jetpacks in midair. Using the jetpacks, this gives our fighters full motion to fly anywhere on the stage, but the stage quickly offers up a different challenge by forcing players to navigate through narrow sections, avoiding electrocution. After gunning down a spaceship that is trying to destroy the foursome, Willy gets involved to try and disable the Climate Converter. To cap off the stage, a boss battle takes place against another character from the Bucky O'Hare universe, known as Total Terror Toad. Away from the game, Terror Toad proved more than a match for Bucky O'Hare and a crew of the Righteous Indignation, using his twin battle axes to cut a swath of destruction through the Betelgeuse forests. Here though, players have the opportunity to take out this axe-wielding foe. After stopping the Climate Converter, the next cutscene depicts Jenny picking up a distress signal coming from an asteroid belt, resulting in an auto-scrolling stage that features many run and jump elements. Players must avoid falling into deep space below by jumping over gaps and moving at a fast enough pace that they do not fall victim to the hands of the crumbly rocks beneath their feet. Eventually, gamers stumble across an unnamed mouse who is being held prisoner on an asteroid by some evil aliens who are apparently in league with the Toads. In return for freeing him, the mouse helps Bucky and the others out throughout the remainder of their adventure. Earlier I mentioned there being a lot of gaps to jump over and unstable surfaces. The mouse uses his magic powers to create bridges between the floating asteroids of the stage. Paired with the game's great voice acting throughout, this just adds to the already impressive cartoon-like experience. Rather than take on an individual enemy at the end of the asteroid belt, a battle must instead commence against a toad-shaped starfighter, offering up a different kind of fight to any boss encounter previously. At the end of this stage, the mouse begs them to help liberate Planet Rat, his homeworld, which has obviously also been taken over by toads. He requests that the heroes save his people's elder, known as Rodent, so it is off to Planet Rat for Stage 5. Stage 5 brings more traditional side-scrolling brawling and shooting together, with the intensity and difficulty being ramped up as players progress deeper and deeper into this arcade game. There is a sub-boss fight against a cog throwing mechanical foe before progressing further into this heavily military protected region. This level ends with a fight against Cyborg Spider, a character who is exactly what his name implies. This giant arachnid with cybernetic enhancements may talk a tough game, but like others before him, you can easily make him pay for all of his cocky boasting, rescuing Rodent in the process. The Elder thanks Bucky and his crew for saving his planet, but informs him that to restore all of the planets in the universe, he must restore them through sending back the planetary life force stored in the Toad Star to the surface of each. Moving on to stage 6, the heroes enter the Toad Mothership, leading to a stage that seems to be straight up inspired by the hover bike stage that can be found within Battletoads that was released 1 year earlier. This fast-paced section functions similarly to a space shooter whereby players must quickly avoid oncoming obstacles and projectiles while shooting down dangerous foes. Once more, this paradigm shift in play keeps the game feeling fresh as gamers continue to progress. This stage sees the foursome do battle with yet another wheeled mechanical Toad-based machine foe, but directly after destroying it, sees the mammals destroy the entire Mothership. This results in a cutscene that sends the Toad Air Marshal into a rage, leaving the Supreme Commander of the Toad Empire's military forces absolutely seething. Shooting beat-em-up action continues aboard the Toad Star, whereby gamers must fight their way through the tough mechanical Death Star-like environment. If you have played Technodrome stages in Turtles games, then you know exactly what sort of obstacles await you in this one. Some conventions across different games and franchises rarely seem to change. Much like is often the case with Konami beat-em-ups, throughout this stage as gamers get forever close to the end, previous bosses must be defeated once more. This is a tactic we have seen used by Konami and the creators of many brawlers time and time again, as not only does it test the players on their acquired learned skills, but it is also a nice easy way to inflate a game's playtime by cheekily reusing assets. The end boss fight occurs against the extremely pissed off Air Marshal, who once finally dispatched of, leads on to the game's closing stage. Before we get to that though, there is another cutscene whereby the heroes locate the planetary life force located in the Toad Star's centre. The final stage is another jetpack based level, whereby the foursome slowly descend to the bottom of the core. After dealing with a range of hostile scientists, the final boss encounter is at last about to unfold. A massive fight against Complex, the sentient computer program who rules the Toad Empire unopposed. This sinister program manifests itself as a computerized Toad face on a view screen, and in the case of a battle commencing at the end of the game, it takes control of a gigantic fighting robot. This is the longest fight in the title, whereby the heroes must slowly obliterate this foe until there is nothing left of it. Closing scenes show the cast on the side of good in the game watching the Toad Star fall and the planetary life force being returned to the galaxy as the credits slowly roll, bringing this epic shooting beat-em-up adventure to a close. Despite this game's overall high quality, I think we should probably easily surmise that this game doesn't get talked about as much as the likes of X-Men, Turtles or The Simpsons, purely based on the fact that the Bucky O'Hare license has never even close to made the same impact as those others just mentioned. In fact, a strong case can be made that the whole plan to turn Bucky O'Hare into a media empire ended up being a bit of a flop. I have documented similar examples of corporations trying to copy the Turtles' success by launching animated TV shows, video games and action figures, all based around old comic books before on this channel. Examples of this include Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, which would get its own awesome arcade beat-em-up from Capcom, and of course, the Cowboys of Mumessa, a franchise that got its own run and gun video game that, like Bucky O'Hare, would also be handled by Konami. All of these games I've just mentioned are amazing, and considering their high quality, all need to stop being ignored today. But as for 1992, this Bucky O'Hare game served as the swan song for the franchise's failed big push into the mainstream children's media spotlight. In fact, due to Bucky O'Hare's lack of popularity, the second series of action figures would be cancelled before they were even finished. There are several photographs available online though, showing some of these unreleased figures, for those who want to learn more, including even a fully packaged complete in box Jenny for all of those furry lovers at home watching today. One would think with a lack of success for the franchise, Bucky O'Hare would be well and truly gone forever. But fortunately for Bucky, in the modern world of man-children, no one lets their childhood nostalgia die anymore. So, in 2017, a company by the name of Boss Fight Studios would announce that they were releasing all new Bucky O'Hare action figures. Because while boomers like to spend their money on sports cars, houses and gold, millennials and Gen Xers on the other hand spend their cash on what has traditionally been considered babies' toys. Babies' toys, I may add, that were so unpopular in the 90s that the range was quickly cancelled. But I guess we are no longer in 1992. But instead 2022, and these days people will buy anything as long as nostalgia is involved somewhere. And with this figure range that features toys with multiple points of articulation and interchangeable hands and faces, it is obvious that old nerds out there are obviously going to have nerdgasms over purchasing that much anticipated Jenny figurine, meaning that life will finally become a little less lonely for them. If action figures aren't your thing though, I could not recommend the Bucky O'Hare arcade game enough. And since there is now the Konami Turtles Cowabunga collection coming to modern hardware, I am pretty convinced that gamers would appreciate a modern Bucky O'Hare double pack on a Nintendo Switch cartridge. It would be nice to finally bring an official copy of this underrated arcade game home. It deserves a little more street cred, in my humble opinion. Certainly more than Street Sharks at least. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Bucky O'Hare the arcade game, a title that shouldn't be ignored. If you enjoyed today's video, let me know what other arcade games you feel are underrated that you think deserve spotlighting on here in the future. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. If you're new here, make sure you like, comment, subscribe and hit that notification bell, as you have no idea how all of those little things help with the algorithm and let as many people see these videos as possible. Also, I would like to add that videos like this are in part made possible due to the generous support I receive via Patreon, making the task of working full time for you lot at home just that little bit sweeter. So I am eternally grateful for that. Special shout outs go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey Almar Sr., Rowan Dincht, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azure Arkai, Jock Quinn Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang He, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Ereliga, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bowell, Chris Fix, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, and everybody else who backs what I do on Patreon. I will forever appreciate that. Thank you.